Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. Shout out to the bunch of people that are already in here. I am your host, Tommy Ashley. This is Reaction Pod, day one. North Carolina training camp opens. Jason Staples, we did not have him on the show Monday night. He was itching to get in. Had to give him a good stiff arm, Heisman stiff arm to keep him out of that one. Jason Buck did not. Well, he did actually have his hourglass with him on Monday night. We have no hourglass tonight, and I'm tired, so you can carry this one completely. Welcome in, my friend. It was good seeing you today.
Yeah, it's been a while, and it was good to see you, and also see a lot going on around those practice fields. It's good to have football season back.
It is, and certainly, and again, welcome everybody in. It's Inside Carolina's Reaction. Before we get started here, I want to make sure everybody's checked out all the work by Adam, Jeremiah on the front end, Michelle, Ben, Jim Hawkins, the photographs, the content on the site. Check it out. I guess we've started to stream, so I can stop that. Check out all the content on Inside Carolina. Consider this the bow or the cherry on top of the sundae of a heck of a day of coverage at Inside Carolina of day one of camp. Before I start, I want to tell a story. Jason Staples is quite fit, as y'all can see. And when you go to practice, there's a big main gate outside the football facility, and it stays locked. But there's a gap underneath it, and it's probably a foot tall. And we were already at practice. Jason was scrambling, trying to get there. And you bear crawled under the gate to get into the facility. I'm impressed because when I walked out, I was like, they'd have to help me up if I crawled under that gate. Once upon a time, I could do it. But yes, just sort of let's get into it. That's a good it cracked me up, to be honest with you, Jason. Let's get straight into it. First thing you noticed when you walked up on camp and walked up at practice, what were your very first observations when you got there?
I think the first thing is that some of the guys on the defensive line and offensive line look a little fitter.
Yep.
That was the most evident thing. I'd say, actually, I mean, the first group that I passed as I was trotting in to go to where we all had to set up for this, was the defensive tackles, and there were 3 or 4 of those guys who was like, he looks pretty good. He's done some work this summer, and some positive changes in terms of body composition and how much they weigh and all of that. Some guys looked good and looked like they'd had a strong off season. And that was the first thing that stood out to me. This was the best on the hoof Carolina's looked, certainly since Max gotten back. And I think that goes all the way back through the Fedora era. I think this is probably the best on the hoof Carolina's looked on the line of scrimmage since, probably 2010, 2009.
Yeah, looking at them, I agree with that. And Mac mentioned it in the post game or the post practice presser that it's as good as they've looked. And he wasn't talking about headshots, which I thought was pretty funny. But you're right. They came in a conversation we had, or they're not carrying a bunch of weight in their bellies. You don't see a bunch of, for old school term, a bunch of beer bellies out there anymore. They're thick in the middle, but they don't appear to be overly fat in the middle. Now, that's not 100% the case that we saw out there, and we can talk more about it, but just sort of comment on that aspect of it. Any weight they've gained or shed has been good on both sides of the ball, I think.
Most of it. And a couple of guys, I want to single out on that. I walked in and went, whoa, Zero looks really good. That's Tamari Fox.
Yes.
And he's put on, since he was out there 2 years ago. Remember, he was suspended last year. Since he was out there 2 years ago, he's got to be up, 12, 15 pounds. And it's good weight. It's, around the hips and butt and in the thighs and all that. He was moving around really well with that weight and looked significantly bigger than he has. I think he looked north of 290, probably close to 300 pounds. And, if I'd been confident that he would come into this season at, 3 bills, I'd have had him significantly higher in terms of my overall scouting report. And that's one I may have missed.
Mhm.
because he came in and looks like he's ready to handle a bigger load and be able to hold up a little bit better against some of the bigger offensive linemen he's going to face this year. And we all know he's quick, and we all know he's got good hands, and he's been a wrestler and plays with that kind of leverage. He's a good player. He just got pushed around some early in his career because he was undersized. He was playing defensive tackle at 270 pounds, and that's tough in the ACC. And he doesn't look like he's going to have to do that this year, and that is a significant upgrade on the interior. I mean, they missed him some last year, but if he's going to be playing closer to that weight and with that bulk, that's going to help a lot.
Yeah, and he's wearing number 0. So if you're going to wear 0 on the line, you better be able to play. And you're right. He certainly looked the part. I mean, I don't know if he was the most physically imposing defensive lineman. He close to it. Let's talk about that position specifically because I think Carolina, we agree, and we can talk about this during this show, and we'll talk about the skill positions for North Carolina are not going to be a problem, especially on offense. They've got some good skill on defense with defensive backs and linebackers. This season's going to hinge on these lines. Period. Um, let's talk about the nose and the interior defensive line because I think that's where you think they can be significantly better this year. Not just Tamari Fox, but a couple other guys.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's easy to forget about last year is they came into the year and they thought they had they thought they had a few possible difference makers on that defensive line, starting with Miles Murphy, who'd had a good year but the year before. And then he had an ankle injury, what, week 2 maybe? It's Georgia State.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, so he had that ankle injury then and was never close to 100% the rest of the year. I mean, he got a little bit better after the bye and had a pretty good bowl game, but he struggled last year. He did not have a good year after that injury. And then Ritzy got hurt in camp and was a shell of himself last year. I mean, he played through injury all last year. And also, I thought Ritzy was a little overweight last year. Ritzy's a guy that looked very good to my eye in this open practice. And so much of this, I mean, this is shorts, right? This is t-shirt All-Americans, t-shirt and shorts All-Americans. So you got to wait until pads go on, but you kind of know what these guys what they're able to do, what some of these guys are able to do in pads because you've seen them. I mean, this is an experienced Carolina team. This is not. You all will remember me saying the last few years, oh, well, they've signed 4 and 5-star talent on the defensive line, but it takes a couple years for that 4 and 5-star talent to really get there. So it might be, a couple of years ago, I'm saying it's way early. They're not going to be really good on the defensive line just because they signed a couple last year. Well, maybe they make a leap. They didn't, but I kept pointing to this year as, if they're going to have a year where you start to see the benefits of the recruiting, it's going to be there. It's going to be this year. And that experience you can see physically with some of these guys. And Ritzy looked like he'd slimmed just a little bit, but he looks imposing, looks like a guy that looks like, the former near 5-star that they'd signed, and he's moving better since he's gotten healthy. So that changes you on the interior. And then you add Fox to that rotation, and that changes you on the interior. And then Travis Shaw has, significantly improved his overall body composition. He's about, 25, 30 pounds?
Yeah. I think Max said that he was 375 at times last year.
Yeah, and he's down to 340. So that's
that is
35 pounds
tremendous.
different. So he's lost about as much weight as Mac has.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean,
And looks as good.
That's a significant thing. Now, you and I talked after practice. Some of the things we saw from Shaw in terms of endurance and in terms of level of fight in the drills and all that is concerning. I'd like to see more toughness from him and more. You want your 5-stars to come out and be the guy that plays with the chip on his shoulder. That's what you want. If you've got that 5-star, you want him to walk out and be that dude who's gonna bring it every day. And I've yet to see that from Shaw, but physically on the hoof, he looks like he put a lot of work in the off season. So, does he take that step forward in terms of the intensity and the coming to work every play that he needs to. I don't
Yep.
know, but even if he doesn't, my case is that you're gonna. I think as long as you can stay a little healthier, you're gonna get a better Miles Murphy, definitely a better Ritzy, and then you add a heavier Fox, and your rotation on the interior looks a lot better than it has the last couple of years, and I think those bodies all stood out significantly when we were out there.
Yeah, I think for sure he's certainly, and the reason you look at him, he's got all the tools to be, like you said before, a very high NFL draft pick. He needs to put it all together, but it also is a mental portion of it. I mean, you can't let little nagging injuries bother you, little minor bumps and bruises bother you. It seems like there are times where you're right. His complete and utter focus is not there on that for whatever reason. Something takes him off of it. But yeah, I think for me, walking out there, you can tell. A lot of people always say, you know how people are when what they do in the dark or whatever. Well, when these guys are in the off season and then they come into camp in shape and looking better, it tells you they've been working. Now it's going to be up to Tim Cross and Ted Monachino to get them going. Let's talk a little bit about what we saw from the, not necessarily super specific, but I feel like they are practicing better. I will say it that way.
Yeah, I think it's evident the impact that Monachino has had, for one, in terms of helping make sure that they've identified what they really need to work on. And day one, they were working on some things that they didn't do well last year.
Mhm.
And that specifically getting hands to getting some of the hand placement and hand fighting that they need to get so that they can shed some blocks, getting hand placement in the proper place immediately off the line of scrimmage. And then, one of the things that was just absolute music to my ears was there was a pretty good rep from I think it was Murphy. And I hear Tim Cross, he comes over immediately after that rep, and he looks at him and he says, "From the waist up, it was great."
Mhm.
And then immediately started working on, okay, but the feet need to be, let's work on getting the feet here. And they, redid worked on redoing the rep and all of that. That's exactly what they need to be doing. And some of the stuff that they had in terms of just taking on, and splitting doubles and making sure you're hugging to the double, that's stuff they didn't do well last year. And that's stuff that allows you to keep your linebackers clean, and to make sure that they can't get the double teams to the guys that they want them to be on.
Yep.
So, it's stuff like that they and just working down the line of scrimmage against zone, that sort of thing. It's stuff like that with basic footwork, getting off the ball, getting your hand into the proper spots, recognizing, okay, he's putting his hand here and finding the elbow with your offhand, some of these other things that I got to see today. And I think you can see some of the impact of Monachino in some of that. And just, I saw a decent attention to detail and for a first day. I mean, it's a teaching day more than anything else. The thing, obviously we'll get to see one more open practice, and that one's going to have pads on, and I'm going to have a whole lot more
Mhm.
attention to detail in terms of how I'm going to watch that practice in the trenches for sure. But, I think, I think signs of being improved in the trenches, as much as you can take from a day where you're not in pads, those signs were, I think, there on the defensive front, because again, you've got the guys that were dinged up last year, and that includes another guy in the defensive line, power and Desmond Evans. Des was moving around great. There's no indication of the injury from last year. So, you add those guys to the defense, and then you add some attention to detail and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do the way that they're supposed to do it after a really good offseason where they're starting to look like veteran players physically. And you got a chance to be not the worst defensive line in the conference. And with those guys, actually, if they play closer to what they're capable of, all of a sudden you move from maybe the worst defensive line to, among the maybe five best. And,
Yep.
that would be a huge, huge change. And change the win projection for Carolina pretty significantly. But again, this is shorts. We're just judging based on the work that's evident from the offseason and some of the stuff that they were working on today and how those guys are moving around. We'll see a lot more once they're in pads.
Yeah, I agree with you. The signs are there. They identified issues, they addressed issues in the offseason, and they're working on those issues straight out the gate. And you're right, the body's there. Somebody asked, let me find the chat. Hopefully, the defense is tired of hearing how bad they are and has a chip on their shoulders. I can say without question that a lot of them are very tired of hearing about it. And Mac said in his post-game presser, if folks didn't listen to it, he digs Chiswick all the time about it. And so there's definitely a sense of, I'm tired of hearing about this. We're going to do something about it. And like I said, and like Jason said, they're at least trending in the right direction on day one in shorts and t-shirts. And John Grisham in the chat said, "How is the physicality from the team?" Again, it's shorts
It's
and t-shirts.
absent. They're in shorts.
Yeah, so there was some physicality out there, but it's, we will find out more as they get into pads. They have a couple days in shorts, and then a couple days in shoulder pads, and then it's full pads after the 5th day. But anyway, Jason, let's stick on the defense here and sort of move out a little bit. Let's talk about the edge. I thought Rucker and to a certain extent Gaynor, those are two imposing guys. Amari Gaynor's, I mean, he can play linebacker with that body. He is fast and all. What'd you see from Rucker and Gaynor there at the jack position? I think this is another position that's got to be effective for North Carolina to have effective defense.
Yeah, it does. And the thing that thing about this is kind of what you're getting with those two already. Again, the good thing about this Carolina team is they've got guys that have played a lot of snaps.
Mm-hmm.
And with some of those guys, like Rucker and like Amari Gaynor, they've done so with some success in the past. So you kind of know what you're getting from those guys. And, Rucker looks to me like he's added a little bit more good weight. My guess is that he's probably playing close to 270 right now. He'll drop some of that in camp, as you get out on the field and sweat a little bit and you're lifting a little bit less. But, his power really, they were on the sled a little bit, the one man sled, working on the one thing you can do with physicality on this. And the sound, you commented on it, the sound when that guy hits that is different from everybody else because he hits it with so much explosiveness and so much power. And, he is who he is. That's what he does. The thing is, Amari comes close to that, even though he's about 30 pounds lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what you're going to get from those guys, you already know, you've got the good physicality. The plus is that they now have two guys that they think that can get to the edge against just about anybody one-on-one. And, having a designated edge pass rusher that you feel can get to the quarterback, if you can get him those one-on-one matchups, goes a long way. And, I still think that what you're going to see a lot of this year on passing downs is both of those guys on the field at the edge. Yeah. So you'll get Rucker on one side and Gaynor on the other, and, go to town against teams that are going to give you the time to sub on third down on, 3rd and long or 2nd and long, that sort of thing. And that gives you some options because now they're going to have to single block one of them most likely. And you feel like that guy you should be able to get some pressure. And it's not really about sacks. It's about changing. It's about getting pressure. It's about just generating havoc and making, quarterbacks get rid of it faster and get rid of it when they're out and not comfortable and all of that. And sacks and turnovers result from that. But they got very little pressure last year. And, that's the thing that they're going to need to get. But the edges look good. I mean, the thing is, this is a very pretty football team.
That's a good way of putting it.
They're pretty. I mean, you walk out there, and my impression, I've seen a lot of really good football teams up front, up close. I mean, I've covered national championship games, national semifinals, that sort of thing. I've been in practice of those teams. I've been in multiple practices with Clemson's national title teams. I've seen all those teams up close. I played with some guys that were pretty good back, when my team in those years was had that kind of athlete. This team, if you walked in and you just looked at them in shorts, you go, this should be a top 10 team. They're pretty. They really are. There's some pretty boys out there. Question is, are they going to be able, is the physicality going to come, and are they going to be able to actually are they going to be something other than looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane? Because you got a lot of guys out there that look like Tarzan. There's some guys that look like they're NFL caliber bodies, but you just haven't seen the production yet, and that's the real question. And you can't get a feel for that yet in shorts and shirts. But what you can get a feel for is they look even more like NFL guys now, some of these guys.
Yeah.
And on the defensive line, and this is something when Mac first got to Chapel Hill for the second time. One of the things that was evident. I mean, he and I were walking behind the team at one point, and I made the comment to him. I was like, "Well, you guys got everything but the trenches. You got no defensive tackles on this roster outside the first two." He said, "Give us about 4 years." So yeah, we don't have them, but give us about 4 years. That's the biggest thing we got to upgrade. We just don't, we can't compete in the trenches there. He that was the first thing he recognized in his self scout when he got here. Got none of those Clemson, Alabama, Georgia boys that on the defensive line, guys that can compete with those guys. And if you walked into practice today and you just saw them in shorts, you go, I mean, that's not Georgia. It's not quite Clemson. You're not quite there, but it's not miles away in terms of the body types that you're seeing. You're pretty close to the same level of bodies. So it's a pretty team. But in shorts, we'll see what happens once you get off the bus, get your pads on, and have to actually, get hit in the mouth. That's the real question.
100% the question. We're talking with Jason Staples. This is Reaction Day 1. UNC training camp opened at the facility in Chapel Hill. Jason and I, two of a plethora of Inside Carolina. I don't know where that came from. Inside Carolina coverage. So, yeah, like I said earlier in the chat, check it all out on the site. Jason, I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on the linebacker, especially not said Gray Power Eccles. Eccles has got some things to work on. I do want to mention Cheeks and Amari Campbell. I think those are if they stay healthy, those are the backups. And yep. I think both of those guys can be really good and will be really good. To Mac's point on depth after the thing is, can they play at a starter level so there's not a significant drop-off? That'll be the question about linebackers. So we'll talk more about linebackers later.
Yeah, there's just not much to get from a linebacker position in a shorts practice, and so I didn't even really watch them. It's like, What am I going to watch? I'm going to watch how well they do foot chopping drills and these sorts of things.
Yeah, so let's talk about the guy that we think stood out the most in camp today, and it's a guy you've talked about a ton, Elijah Huzzie. You pointed, and I was paying attention, but you pointed out and said, just watch him. They don't even look his direction in practice, and they did a little bit later. What'd you see from him? Because you can get a sense in defensive backs and wide receivers who's going to be good in shorts and T-shirts. I thought Huzzie, I mean, he could be a big difference maker for this team.
Yeah, that guy is he. Every time I've seen him play and live, every time I've seen him out there, he's only confirmed my initial impressions of him, which was, this is an NFL guy. And there are a couple things that just stand out about him, and one of them is he's just so in balance and under control all the time. He never looks like he's laboring in coverage, which tells you, first of all, the guy can run. I mean, run. Because, you start to panic as a defensive back when a guy runs by you. And there was one play where he was up against Tez and, he's in position, it's a good, good coverage on a vertical. And then Tez just started to pull away and the ball was already gone to the other side by that point. It was one of those like, yeah, Tez is real fast.
Yeah.
Tez is really, really fast.
Different
But
fast.
yeah, that's different fast. But, you know, and even there, he didn't look panicked. He was still staying in position. And, if that ball had come, he probably ends up punching through the hands and, getting a breakup. But you see him just so at ease and in balance. And he's never, outside his frame in terms of where his feet are. And, he runs routes for guys. The guy runs a curl route and he runs the curl route with the guy at the same time he's running it. And, I think he can be a really, really good player. The other thing that stood out to me is he was with the punt returners today and he might've been the most impressive guy catching it. I mean, he made one catch on a dead run about probably 25 yards from where, he had set up as a punt returner. It was kind of pushed to the punter's right, kind of went off the side of the foot a little bit. And he just took off and caught it around his knees and it made it look easy. I mean, the guy's hand-eye coordination is filthy. I mean, and his ability to catch punts and you barely hear it hit his hands. Very soft hands, very impressive, center fielder-ish in terms of, that hand-eye coordination that, yeah, really impressive in both respects. But I think that guy, if he can stay healthy, really changes the defense for Carolina because you feel like you can put him in different spots and neutralize guys. And he moved around. I mean, he was not just at one side or the other, outside, inside. They did a lot with him based on some things that they did defensively, which we won't get too much into, but his versatility is also going to help a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like I said to you at practice, if he can take away that third of that field, that changes the entire game for this North Carolina team. You got the other guys back there, Biggers, Don Chapman were the primary safeties. Stick Lane was out there a fair amount. Stick's a little fella.
He's small.
And he struggled a couple times, but I think he'll be a player for North Carolina. Will Hardy, of course, was out with a lower body. That Max said afterwards that he should be ready for South Carolina, and they know what they have. I do like the point of, instead of fretting over who's out, it gives the guys opportunities to play. And who else on the defensive backfield, Jason, before we flip it over and take our mid ad read break, who else in that defensive backfield stood out for you? I thought Derek Allen looked a little better than I thought he would look, but of course my eye is untrained.
Yeah, it's hard to get much from safety position in this kind of day because he's not doing a whole lot in terms of run fits. So little harder to tell there on the safeties. I was watching more of the corners because you can get a little bit more out of that for shorts practices. And I thought Marcus Allen looked like he had a good summer and looks like he should be a solid player. I mean, they matched him up with Tez a good bit and, he held his own. So, that's solid. That's a good thing. If he can hold his own with Tez, he's not going to have his hands much more full with anybody else in the ACC. So, that was a positive. I think they've got two corners they can feel comfortable about. The guy that surprised me was Tayon Holloway.
Yep, 20.
Yeah. There's one point where I was standing next to Greg Barnes and I'm like, who's 20? And we both had to look it up. It's like, looking on our phones for a second. Oh, that's Holloway. And the reason I was asking is like, he moves really well. Like he's really fluid. I mean, you can see he's not quite as experienced as Allen, but very similar body type and, fluidity level to Allen. I mean, very almost interchangeable there. Allen's a little longer and you can see the experience difference a little bit, but I think Holloway may jump into the third corner role. He showed today he's in contention to be in the third corner role. I think it's him and Legend Cavazos kind of battling for that third corner role as much as anybody. And Armani Chapman has his work cut out just to get on the field. Transfer from Virginia Tech. I'm not sure he's going to play all that much this year if Holloway looks anything in pads like he did first day in shorts. So, I think they should feel like they could have four corners that they could trust coming into the year. And that's really good. I think generally speaking, you hope to have three that you really like, and maybe a fourth that you can trust. And I think they may be there. But I thought Holloway may have been the biggest surprise of the two probably biggest surprises of the entire day to me were Holloway and Tamari Fox. Those were both very positive surprises, and I thought both players looked better than I expected.
Yeah, the key is going to be staying healthy on that defensive side. They're working on depth. To Jason's point earlier in the show, the depth is not there that they need, but they've got some talent on the defensive side for sure. Uh, I see it. I can't even get into it. You know me. I'll have 12-0. We'll do a show in a couple weeks, and I'll be saying 12-0. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it again. But anyway, I've got a bunch of questions over here. I'm gonna get to those at the end of the show. But I'm gonna take a second to talk about Johnny T-shirt, JohnnyT-shirt.com. I always
Woo!
do it. Always do it because it's imperative you guys support them. They are alumni owned and operated. They're right on Franklin Street. If you're in town for the Eric Church concert tomorrow, go to Johnny T-shirt. Go to Topo, do all that stuff, but hit up Johnny T-shirt, support them. If you're not in town ahead of season, get all your gear there for the football season. JohnnyT-shirt.com. The 10%, of course. I mean, we've already talked about why you should be a premium member on Inside Carolina. And then they give you 10%. I mean, everybody should like free money. That's Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. We'll be right back. Reaction training camp, day 1 at Inside Carolina. All right, Jason, let's switch over to the offense. And like I said, I'll get the questions. There's some defensive questions in there. I'll get to them at the end of the chat. But on offense, I said it earlier, this team's skill positions are not a problem. I mean, the receiving core, everybody wants to talk about Andre Green, and Andre Green can play. I don't know how much Andre Green's going to play, given what they have in front of him. What'd you see overall offensively today?
Well, I mean, I think you just said about half of it, which is as expected with the skill guys on the offensive side. I mean, you got Drake May, so Drake's going to be Drake. We don't even need to talk about Drake.
Yeah.
But
even though we can debate the throw,
I know what you're talking about. So there's a long throw down the sideline to Kobe Paysor, and May airmailed it by about half a yard more than he should have, just a little off, a little too far. And Tommy is absolutely convinced
that Pacer's got to catch that ball.
Pacer's got to catch that. You got to come down with that. Now, my view is if it only touches your fingertips and you're outstretched and, it doesn't even touch the second metacarpal there.
You got to dive.
It's just not it's not one that you necessarily expect a guy to get. That's one maybe in pads a guy lays out for that and might get it. But the coaches are going to tell guys, you don't lay out today.
And I tell you, and you dig me at the press conference afterwards because Mac said Drake airmailed Kobe on one, and I feel somebody nudged me in the back, and they're like, "Told you, got to catch it, got to catch it." Yeah. Somebody in the chat did ask about Drake, the footwork. They were doing a lot of footwork drills there. Just briefly touch on that.
Too early to tell. Yeah. And in terms of basic fundamentals, the footwork is different because they're not doing the back pedal out that Phil Longo swears by. And Longo's big thing is if you back pedal out and you keep that left shoulder more open, then you should be able to throw better to the left side than if you do more of a traditional crossover drop and then you have to turn and kind of pull through there. You're from a more closed position. So you end up throwing maybe better to the right side, but not as well to the left. And he's got a case there. I mean, statistically speaking, he's got a case. And you can see Drake is doing more traditional footwork just in terms of how they're working it and all of that. But, this is a situation where in shorts, you don't even have it's not that you don't have live rounds flying. You don't even have the gun off safety yet. Right. I mean, it's
you got managers putting their hands up, simulating pass rush.
Yeah, I mean, this is like watching a pro day at that point, and you're going to look fine there. What I want to see is what happens when you're in pads. And even if he's in a different color jersey and nobody can touch him, what happens when the pocket's a little bit muddy and he has to step and find the right spot and glide or slide to the right spot and keep his feet under him? Is he keeping is he keeping all of his cleats in the ground? Is he ready to throw at all those points, or is he starting to bounce like he's done in the past? Is he getting too high in the pocket, standing too tall and not down into his cleats? That's stuff that, we'll be able to see a little bit more once he's in pads, but it's hard. It's you can't assess that in shorts at this stage. You can drill it and you can keep working it. And they have been, but I've known that they've been doing those drills since the spring. So, and he did them all summer. So you hope that that has taken that's muscle memory at this point, but you just can't really know until, you at least have rubber bullets going once a guy's, once you get the pads on and there's pocket breakdown and guys can, tap you in the pocket and that sort of thing. But, you can't really know.
Yeah. And then as far as backups, certainly Connor Harrell was out there. He looked shaky at times. He definitely can move his feet. You mentioned Russell Tabor, a walk-on from Charlotte School.
Yeah, he
Threw the
surprised me
ball
with how the
really
ball
well.
came off his hand. I had to look him up. I was like, who is that? He's aside from Drake, the ball came off his hand better than anybody else's today.
Yeah, and you got Boaz and Tad Hudson out there as well. So quarterback's going to be good. I think they'll be pretty good. Stay healthy, they'll be pretty good. What else, Jason? Skill position wise, I thought receivers, Tez, Nate McCullum. I'd be shocked, absolutely shocked if they don't both start. That leaves Kobe
So would everybody
Mayfield.
else around the Carolina program.
And then JJ Jones made some plays. Of course, JJ was on our Players Lounge earlier today. If you hadn't checked that out,
JJ had a really tough catch. One really tough catch. I mean, one of those where the guy draped on him, concentration catch, and I think that might have been Huzzy on him actually.
yeah, I think you're
And
right. He was a little in.
little. I think it was a 5-yard in. I don't know if it was a 5-yard in or a called slant, but Huzzy shut it down, so there's only like a 4-yard gain. But it's one where that'd have been a real easy ball to drop. One thing I did see from the skill guys is I really liked one of the drills that I saw Galloway doing with those guys, which was he hooked a towel over the biceps of those guys of them while a guy's standing there playing catch. Hooked the towel over the biceps, and then as the ball's on the way, he would jerk the towel with different levels of force to kind of pull the guy's hand apart. So it's, mimicking the kind of pull that you get from defensive backs as the ball's coming. And that forces you to power through it without your hands getting hard. So, you're still, you have to focus on catching with soft hands and catching with the hands while while someone's kind of pulling on you and you're distracted by that. That's a really good drill. I liked that. I saw a bunch of those guys doing that drill with him. And I think that's the sort of, it's hard to improve catching. A lot of catching is just reps and, going out there with the jugs gun, and the receivers were they spent 30 or 45 minutes with the jugs gun afterwards. I mean, they were still going. That was a long press conference from Mac today. And the receivers were still on the jugs gun when he finished. So,
Yep.
that tells you something. Actually, you heard me laugh for a second. I don't know if you knew why. I kind of laughed, put my hand over my mouth, and walked away for a second from that group. The reason I did is, I don't know who it was, but one of the receivers, they'd had the jugs guns turned up to max. So they were spitting the ball out at max. And just like every team, I mean, we used to do this back, when I was at Florida State. You see how close you can get to it while still catching it. And one of those guys, the ball came out and just drilled him in the helmet, and he went down like a sniper had shot him. And I just lost it because it was hilarious. But those guys putting in the work to do that and spending the extra 30, 40 minutes. And, the running backs that were out there with Drake May, 45 minutes after the practice, working on catching over the shoulder, doing some stuff up the sideline and working on some things just to make sure they're getting their hands on the football. That was all positive. I mean, that's the stuff you have to be good, is for those guys to stay after and do that sort of thing. But I think receiver wise, to bring this full circle, they've got 6 guys that I think, and Max said in the press conference, we need to have 6. We need to have 6 that are basically starters. And I think they've got 6. I think there's going to be some competition to see who those 6 are for sure. But I think they've got 6. They might have 7. And again, I think Walker and McCollum are your main guys, but you're going to get some positives from Paysor is definitely going to play. Blackwell was out there with the ones a good bit. JJ Jones was out there with the ones a good bit. Andre Green was out there with the ones a good bit. So I mean that gives you your 6 right there. And you feel pretty comfortable with running those guys out there in different spots. And they didn't all line up in the same spot all the time. I mean, McCollum was outside some, and they did some things with personnel that they've not done the last couple years that I think will be really interesting. We're not going to get into that, but some of the things that they did with personnel groupings and all of that, I think will have a chance of maximizing some of what their skill sets are. So some positive things there. And again, the biggest thing that you can see is McCollum, I think, is as advertised. He's going to have a huge year in the slot. I think he's going to be a yards after catch guy and should fill Josh Downs' shoes really well. Folks forget Josh Downs was not healthy last year. He got hurt in game 1, and he was never healthy the rest of the year, not fully. And McCollum's going to be able to step in and fill those shoes much more than I think a lot of people expect. And then Walker, he had the one long touchdown that we saw, and that was just a run and hide. There's just nobody else in the field as fast as him. So, this team, skill wise, you look at their receivers, you look at the tight ends. Tight ends, you have some concerns about physicality blocking, but in terms of pass catching and all of that, this is a top 2 or 3 team in the ACC, and I think that's very evident. And then you got the best quarterback of the ACC throwing to him. So, yeah, I mean, no surprises there.
A lot of good stuff there. As far as somebody mentioned, Doc Chapman, he'll play. He got some run in practice today. And you mentioned the tight ends, and I was talking to Greg Barnes, and we're talking about Freddie Kitchens. And Max said after the game, after the practice, that Freddie has told his guys, "You're not going to play if you don't block." And so that'll be an interesting take. As far as the tight ends, they rotated through. I mean, there may be a starter, quote unquote starter, but I think that'll be rotated through a lot. The running backs are another area. It's tough to tell in shorts. Obviously, Omarion Hampton will win every shorts and t-shirt Olympics.
I don't know, Brooke. I think British Brooks gives him a run. I mean, British is actually, I think, thicker. And he's I bet you if you put those guys on the scale, British is about 5, maybe even 10 pounds heavier.
We might have to bet on that one. We'll see.
I'll put 5 on it. I got 5 on
it. next open practice, I'm gonna
about
roll
all I can spare, but I got 5 on it.
Well, both guys look in ridiculous shape, and it'll be interesting to see who comes out of that running back room. There's really not even much reason for us to talk about it because
you can't tell.
You can't tell, and they got to stay healthy.
Some guys looked really, really good running through holes with against defense in shorts today, but
and so that's an interesting take.
Slagle got it.
Yeah, absolutely. I got it. I just wasn't going to give you any flowers for it. Because the lyrics on that song are probably not safe for this podcast. The total lyrics.
One of the best beats of all time, though.
Let me ask you about the offensive line. Everybody wants to know about it. I thought some of the tactics and trainings that Randy Clements used were interesting. Greg Barnes talked about it, a couple of them. What'd you see there? I thought for the most part, for the overwhelming most part, they looked fitter and in shape and better physically. Your take?
For the most part. For the most part. I still have some concerns up front. I do. I think what you got in Roland. I think he's going to be a solid player. You know what you got in Gaynor. He is a solid player. Barnes moved better than I thought he might. I mean, I focused on him some when they went to team period, just because in shorts you're going to see some of the edge guys try to basically beat him with speed. How well is he going to move? How well is he going to set with his pads square? Some of those things. And he looked fine. I mean, fundamentally, he looked fine and looked like he moved quickly enough to be able to handle the left side. If that carries over into pads, then you feel pretty good about 3 of your 5. And then you got to really make sure that those guard positions are established. And you know, Montelis has been okay in the past. He's been decent. Didn't have a good year last year. He looks fit right now. Can he put it together for his final year? Maybe. I've got some questions about Adorno. Adorno was the starter at the right guard position consistently. He's got some work to prove to me that he's going to be able to handle that consistently at the, at above, say, the average level in the ACC. You've got, Lampkin. Lampkin looks so small. He's just really small, but man, does he move well.
He's nasty.
He's got the best feet on the offensive line of the whole group. Lampkin's feet stood out, but he's just so small. So, and then you've got, the one guy that to me was the most disappointing guy to look at out there, and that's 55. I mean, you got a former 5-star offensive tackle recruit who, to my eye, doesn't look like he's anywhere close to being in the depth chart or anywhere close to being in a position to contend for playing time at guard. And that's Zach Rice. It just doesn't look close to me right now. And, he's one of those guys that does carry some weight around his middle. And, that's concerning to me.
You gonna sneeze on me? You got to get rid of the cats in the house, man. Yeah, I mean, I thought Barnes looked good out there. He's obviously got some length to him. When you're going up against Kamen Rucker or Amari Gaynor, it can be troublesome at times. I think, like I said to open the show, Jason, and this is why I saved offensive line for last before we get to questions, is this is where this game's won and lost for North Carolina, period. And you're muted, so before you get started, don't forget to unmute. But if they can't handle the trenches on both sides of the ball, but as much on the offensive side as the defensive side, then this team is just going to be – they're just going to be. So what did you see today as far as offensive line, from technique, from whatever, from Clements and the coaching changes that stood out for you?
Well, I mean, don't forget Randy was at Florida State. So I got to see some of what he did down there and get a sense of what he does, as a coach. So a lot of that's not really that surprising. Mm-hmm. You know what he's going to do with his guys. You know what he's going to emphasize and how he's going to coach them. The real question is personnel and how the personnel is going to be able to handle what they're being asked to do in this offense and by their offensive line coach. The plus to me is the biggest plus is I think both of the young tackles, and that's Diego Pounds and Trevion Green, they physically look close to ready. Just in terms of, if you look at those guys and you say, okay, could that guy hold up against an ACC schedule? Is he strong enough and quick enough to be able to do the job? Does he look like he's got the physicality about him to do it? Both those guys do, to my eye. Now, I think Carolina would prefer that they not have to. Right? I think right now, Roland is better right now than Trevion Green at right tackle, and it's not especially close. But Green is a guy that gives you somebody that you feel would be okay if you had to play him, right? And a guy that you should feel really good about moving forward. I mean, that's an enormous human being, and watching him do some of the footwork stuff that Clements asked those guys to do. I mean, they're doing some pass set, backward shuffle, and some of those things. And watching him work on keeping his pad level low and all that. He does all that pretty darn well for his size and given his age. So I feel pretty good about him, watching him, still I think not entirely back from the knee injury, but close. And Pounds looks like there are some things I want to see. He's going to be one of the guys I focus on the most in the pad practices that we get to watch, because Pounds is a guy that he moves well enough at that left tackle spot with a big enough body with enough length that if it comes to it and they really feel like they need to have William Barnes at guard in order to have their best five on the field, Pounds might be able to step in and be a viable player. Maybe.
And Mac
Again,
talked about getting him work against the ones to see if he could hold up.
yeah, and I think that's one of those things where tackle is one of those positions where in some ways there's less to learn right away in terms of some of the mental stuff than at guard, where you're having to pass things off on the interior a little bit more. Pass protection at tackle is very much physical tools and fundamentals. It's an individual. It's like corner, right?
Mhm.
It's an individual position where you're as often as not, you're one-on-one with that guy. And what you have to learn to do other than that is how to pass off twists and all of that. And that's the same stuff with pattern matching at corner. But can you play with the fundamentals at that spot? And do you have the physical development to be able to hold up? If that's yes and yes, then you can play tackle. You can have a young guy play at tackle. It's harder to play a young guy and have success at guard for that reason.
Mhm.
Pounds is a guy that is going to be interesting. I think both of those tackles are guys that they're going to need to take long looks at in the preseason to see, like, is it a situation where, you already know William Barnes is a better than average guard in the ACC. He's a good player at guard. Okay. If you move him to left tackle because you need him there, you get worse at guard because he's not there. But if you can get close to the same level of play from Pounds, or maybe even the same level or even better, depending, now you could potentially move Barnes back to guard and you're better at two positions. Right? That's one of the things that, that's why Mac Brown right now is saying we need to get those guys some reps against the ones. They need to get,
Yep.
and I think they need to get both of those guys, Green and Pounds, and I'd like to see them both working on both sides. I think Pounds looks more like a left and Green looks more like a right to me, just in terms of how they move their feet. But I'd want to get them both. I'd want to cross train them both, and I'd want them both to get some reps against the ones, because that gives you some flexibility on your offensive line to have those guys closer to ready. And I think they're closer to ready than anybody else, outside of Willie Lampkin and the starters. And Lampkin's probably, I think he's got a real good chance of moving into the starting lineup. You've got your five starters plus Lampkin, and then those other two are the closest to being ready to start. You've got to get those guys ready, and then that gives you some flexibility in case somebody goes down, or in case you just need to shuffle to get your guys a little bit better on the interior. So yeah, I thought that was another positive, was just, I think those two guys look like they're going to be hits in the recruiting game, and they're going to develop into good players.
Indeed, that is the offense. We can talk about special teams briefly. Ryan Coe looks like he could step in at linebacker. I mean, that's a big fella kicking the football.
I was surprised. Like, that kicker's big.
You're like, who's that guy? I was like, oh, that's the kicker. And then, they were doing some punting work. We'll see how all that goes. Of course, they've got some experience across the special teams. I think where the special teams comes in is the returners. That North Carolina needs to get a little more dynamic in the return game there. Jason, let's take some questions. We're talking with Jason Staples, Inside Carolina expert analyst. And coming off of 54 scouting reports and all that work here, now we're talking about actual practice, man. We're talking about practice.
Practice, man.
I'm just going to go down the
What are we
practice.
talking about? Practice?
We'll go down the questions I have.
Practice,
I starred, and a couple of them we hit. Are the O linemen in shape? That's Preston from Greensboro. We've talked about that. For the most part, they appear to be in shape. So we'll kick that one out. Carolina 93, I still want my screen name back. How did Barnes look at left tackle? We nailed that one. I believe Amari Campbell being on second team is a great sign. Is that right, or is that just bad depth at linebacker?
TBD.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a valid question to be answered a little bit later.
We'll know a lot more about that after the padded practice.
Absolutely. John Grisham, obligatory question about the D line. We talked about that at great length earlier in the show. Appreciate the question. Need an autograph book, Mr. Grisham. I mean, you can even forge the signature. I'll still say it's real. Gilbert asked, was there a special teams specialist preview from Jason and Tommy? We did not do a preview. Jason didn't do scout reports. I can say that if Ryan Coe can get the towards angle side of it, he's got the leg to go deep for North Carolina in the field goal game. That'll be one thing to watch over the
Sounds like my
course of the
golf
spring.
game.
Yeah, man, I can kill it. I just can't find it. I need a geo tracker on my ball. But it makes it interesting. I mean, who wants to walk on pretty grass all day?
Yeah.
Uh,
I do think McCollum changes the punt return game for you, or at least, Downs was really good as a punt returner last year. McCollum catches it really well. And, he was a dynamic punt returner for Georgia Tech and a dynamic kick returner. So he's going to almost certainly do both for Carolina this year. And then Huzzy, I watched him catch, like I said, really well. Maybe if you, want to differentiate between your inside the 20 hands guy that catches it, maybe put Huzzy back there. And I thought 23, I thought he caught it well.
yeah.
Petaway caught it well, returning punts as well. And, I think he's going to be the other kickoff return guy as well with McCollum most likely. So you got some dynamic guys that can run on the specialties as well. So I think should be fine in the return game at least.
Yeah, and people say you don't want your best players returning kicks. Well, I remember a certain running back returning one against NC State that was probably top 5 moment in Kenan Stadium. You got to have
Top 3.
special. You could win absolutely. You win games on special teams in the return game. I mean, and North Carolina hasn't been able to do that a lot lately. It'd be interesting. Slagle asked, "How different did Travis Shaw look?" We talked about that a little bit. He looks the part.
Looked better, looked significantly better. But again, you'd like to see him be able to finish drills without going down to a knee quite as often.
Yep, I agree with that. Freeman Matthews, Jason, question: who have you got to be the best player on defense this season?
Huzzy first, I think Huzzy's the best player on defense, and I think Rucker's the next.
And then Ced Gray's got to be up there as well.
Well, yeah, actually, I should change that. So it should be just going on the guys I paid attention to today because I already took Ced Gray for granted. Yeah, Huzzy first, then Ced Gray, then Rucker.
Yeah, got some good talent there. Again,
Ced Gray's a player.
It's going to be it's going to be trench warfare. How are we feeling about Barnes on the backside? We talked about that. Randy M says, I think he shines with his physicality against edge rushers and not worrying so much about combo blocks and getting to the second level. You sort of talked about that. I mean, tackles are basically man on man, and left tackle is going to get all the discussion points. But I think TBD again. We'll go that way for Barnes out there, but he looks the part for sure. Dwayne Hamlet, who's the most vocal person in the secondary? It's tough to tell given our angle. If I had to pick one, I think Don Chapman was pretty vocal out there. I think Biggers was vocal. Huzzy is not a talker, at least not an outward talker.
He talks a little bit to the receivers.
Yeah, he's in some ears, but it's for your ears only. And yeah, it got a little chippy at times.
Yeah, I'd say that's the safeties, Gio and Chapman. Those two were probably the most vocal out there, and they should be.
Slagle asked, did any freshman catch your eye? Well, Mari Campbell is a true freshman.
Didn't really pay attention to the linebackers, though, for me.
Yeah, the receivers, Culliver, Christian Hamilton, Paul Billups look good at times. They've just got a skill guy coming in and then a linebacker coming in with what they have in front of them. It's going to be hard for them to see the field. Mack insists that the linebackers have to play. He's implored Tommy Thigpen to play those guys. So I think we'll see Amari Campbell out there. I think I'd go Amari Campbell, Sebastian Cheeks as a red shirt, but you got some talent in the freshman class. Let's say there's
I mean,
another question.
if you count the redshirt freshman, then Holloway was by far the guy that stood out the most.
I agree
Tayon
with that.
Holloway.
Yeah, and he's a guy that if you listen to the Players Lounge podcast that we did, every one of them mentioned Elijah Huzzy. Every one of them mentioned Elijah Huzzy, but several mentioned Tayon Holloway as a dude
Yeah,
back there, and he's been
he's got NFL potential just based on frame and how he moves. I mean, he's really smooth and does a really good job of matching at that position.
yeah,
I liked both of the young ends or the young jacks. That is, so that's Thompson and Harvey, both of them. I think both of those guys looked like neither looked like they're anywhere close to ready for this year. But just watching them move and looking at their frames and all that, they've got some promise. And I'm a little bit biased too. I coached actually with Harvey's head coach for a year, and he sang Harvey's praises. He really thought he was a really good player and would be a good player. So I'm interested in how those guys do. But I thought both of those guys looked like they've got a chance moving on. That neither is a guy you want playing this year though.
yes,
And I did also really like watching that group because of how Rucker and Gaynor were coaching those guys. Both of those guys, they were, they would do a drill, and then you'd see Gaynor immediately pull the guy over and then walk through, this is what we want. This is what we want. And Rucker do the same sort of thing. I mean, those guys, they're actually, again, that's one of the benefits of having a lot of veterans on the team. You could see some players coaching players out there today, and that was refreshing to see as well, because you don't always see that, and you haven't always seen that at Carolina.
yeah, the player-led teams, and you're right. And Rucker and Gaynor are those two guys. E.C. Keller asks, any returning player didn't see much time last year catch your eye? We hit on a couple,
DJ
being
Jones.
Diego Jones. Yeah, and I wanted to talk about him a little bit. Speak to what you saw, because what I saw is him working on his craft after practice.
For almost an hour.
Yeah, for a long time, and that's a guy that is a forgotten guy.
Yeah.
I think, Jason, you think he could possibly get some time back there?
Yeah, I was surprised. So when I was going through my reports this year, I discussed it a little bit with some of the other folks on the Inside Carolina staff of like, should I do a report on DJ, because I like him a lot. Athletically, he's one of the best athletes on the team. You don't play running back and have success at running back in the ACC unless you're a good athlete. He's a really good athlete, but he's brand new at that position, right? I mean, and you got what, 6 guys at safety, and only 2 guys are going to be on the field most plays. I mean, you got a couple transfers coming in. I mean, is he just going to get lost in the shuffle having moved there? And then I watched him today and was like, danged if that guy's not going to be on the field, because he was out there. He was the number 2 guy at the star position. He was rotating in with Boykins. And that surprised me a little bit. But then, thinking about it was like, that makes some sense, because at the star position, he's a little over 200 pounds, about 205. He's kind of like a big star. He's a big star. He's kind of like a Sam Backer, but he moves like a safety. I mean, he actually, I thought, matched up against some of the quicker slots a lot better than I expected. And he's going to push for time at that spot. Boykins played 900 plus snaps last year at that spot. And I don't think he's going to get anywhere close to that, because Huzzy's going to play at that spot when they need, when they go to true nickel, Huzzy's coming on, and they're going to try to take away the pass with Huzzy at slot. And they're going to put 3 true corners on the field, which is something I thought they should have done last year more. They just didn't have the personnel. They didn't have a third corner who is better than Boykins in those situations. They do this year. But the other thing is, I think you're going to see DJ push. He's going to push hard for time at that spot. And he's going to push Boykins, who's a good player. He's going to push Boykins to maintain that spot, because Jones is fluid and handled his business in coverage and was able to match up well against quickness and he's got, a little bit bigger frame to be able to handle some of the tight end stuff that's going to get thrown at you at that role. So yeah, I think that was interesting. And then again, spending an hour after practice working on specific techniques and match stuff against slot and tight end roles. This is a guy that, how many guys, when they get passed up at one position, he's no longer getting carries at running back, and it's clear that, there's 4 or 5 other guys ahead of him on the depth chart, just transfer. And this guy just doesn't. He doesn't transfer. He moves positions and says, you know what, I can be an athlete there, and I might have a future there, and then works at it. And that he was a revelation today. I thought he looked like a guy that could play this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it was pretty cool to see how much work he was putting in after practice. Not everybody was out there. There's a ton of guys that stayed out there, but he was one of the ones that was out doing work. Derek Morrison says, has anybody ever discussed Don Chapman? Oh, Doc Chapman. We talked about Doc Chapman earlier. He's going to get some run at the slot. He's got some guys ahead of him, obviously, especially with McCollum coming in. But I thought he looked
I think
good.
McCollum and Pace are going to get the primary reps at the slot, and then really Chapman is really truly a 2 right now.
Absolutely. So appreciate everybody that's been on here. So hour and 10 minutes in, Jason, but I got a Greg Barnes question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So I gotta figure it out. And it goes to, I think, Cameron asks, what'd you see from the new coaches? So this will cover that for you. Appreciate the question from the chat. Greg Barnes says, impact of having someone like Kitchens on the staff, especially for Lindsey, who has spent his entire career at high school at college ball. I will say this, Kitchens is an old school, no BS, get in your what rear end coach, and I love it. It's why I quit football. But I love it as I've gotten older. Jason, just talk about what you saw from the new coaches and sort of what we can expect from the new coaches.
Well, I thought the corners as a whole looked better. Now, how much of that is personnel change versus better accountability, or maybe some changes in terms of what they're doing a little bit with drills or whatever? It's hard to tell, because you can't give a whole lot of credit to a coaching change for Huzzy, right? That's just, you went out and found a player, or actually his coach at the prior stop contacted Mac Brown and said, hey, you really need to take this guy. He's going to be in the portal. You need to take him. So I think it's a TBD. It's too early on the corner side to really do much. The Kitchens thing, I think, is one that we can already talk about what kind of impact that has. Partly because Kitchens and Chip, they've known each other for decades, right? So they've been friends for a very long time, and so the synergy there on offense is going to be really good. And he is going to he's going to require a physical edge from a position that can kind of help set the physical tone of games. The personnel he's working with there, you can say all you want that, you won't play for me unless you block. But, that doesn't help if your personnel is not great at blocking just because of who they are or how they're built or whatever. So, but he's going to hold them accountable. He's going to try to help instill some toughness to the offensive side. That's all well and good. The place where I think he brings the most benefit is as another voice in the offensive game planning room when you start going up against defenses that are really good.
Mm-hmm. And he's run game coordinator too.
Right.
If folks didn't.
So this is where, when you're coaching in the NFL is different from coaching in college for a lot of reasons. But one of the differences is in the NFL, there's less overall variation in terms of like offensive scheme and all of that. You don't see the triple option, you don't see the service academies in the NFL, but you do see just unbelievable numbers of wrinkles and little things that change where, you change how you block this just slightly by a half a yard, or, you X this or instead of blocking it straight, like you have the last 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, because they lined up expecting this and they came off the ball expecting that, and then you change that one little wrinkle, it's exactly the same play, but you change how you block it with 2 players, all of a sudden it's a 60-yard touchdown. The NFL is all about finding those tiny little things where it's like, we've been showing it this way all year, and they like to match up this way against this. But if we do this and we zig when they're expecting the zag, we may get a big play out of it. I think that's one of the places where Kitchens, having his voice as a former NFL coordinator, really matters. And the other thing is, in the NFL, the parity, the difference between the best team in the NFL and the worst team in the NFL is not that big.
Right.
And week in, week out, especially if you're coaching, in Cleveland where Kitchens did, week in, week out, you're often, you tend to coach against teams that are better than you. Right? So you have to find ways of finding little advantages. And I think Kitchens, and spending some time with him at the coaching clinic, I got the impression that he's pretty good at that. So, bringing that to the table. And then the other thing, I'm a firm believer that one of the things that can really hurt a team is only having one strong voice in a offensive or defensive meeting room. And I've got good reasons for thinking that, going all the way back to Florida State days. Mickey Andrews was a great defensive coordinator, but Mickey Andrews was a much better defensive coordinator with Chuck Amato on staff with him, because Chuck drove Mickey crazy and drove some of those coaches on staff crazy, because he was the strong voice who was the contingency guy. But what if they do this? What if they do this? Right?
You need a couple alphas to balance it out.
He was a strong voice that would come in and force you, okay, well, we've got this ready, but then if they do that, we've got to have a plan for that. And the same kind of problem happened with Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher was a better coach as an offensive coach when there were 2 or 3 guys in that meeting room who could give it back to him and, be a part of that planning process, and Jimbo wouldn't just run him over. But, if you guys if any of you watched the, this is 2 years ago, they had the Texas A&M staff do the national championship game, the coaches round table or whatever. It's like 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And it was the Texas A&M coaching staff. And Jimbo was the only one from the offense who said a word 98% of the time. And the rest of them were like, yeah, exactly, Jimbo. Yeah. Well, that's not good for your offensive meeting room when a guy comes in and he's like, here's what we're going to do. Okay, coach. No, you need that other alpha in your room. And ideally you have 2 more, to where you have some fights about scheme and what you're going to do against this in the meeting room, so you can hash that out, so that you come out with 1 or 2 more things that you're ready to do. And, you've thrown a couple things out that the coordinator was planning on doing, that it's been determined after the fight that, what, this is better than that. And you know what, I'm going to listen to you guys. And Chip is a guy, again, having spent time with him, he's a guy that's going to listen to some of those strong voices in the room. So adding Kitchens' voice to that room, Chip is not threatened by that. So adding that strong voice just means you're going to see a couple more things. And I think the benefits of that come out when you play against a Clemson or against a South Carolina, teams with talent that should challenge you on the offensive side. When you're playing against a rival who's going to do some things against you that, make you uncomfortable and have, closer to your talent level or more, in the case of Clemson. Clemson's defense is every bit as talented as Carolina's offense. Well, you better have 3 voices in that room that are all seeing different things, and then can bring that together to generate more. And I think that's what Kitchens brings to the table as much as anything. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that.
Good place to stop. It's 1 hour and 16 minutes in. It's been a hell of a show, Jason. Shout out 260 plus folks that have been here for the large majority, if not all of the time, is what it makes Inside Carolina special. Check out all the coverage again. I'm gonna rehash that. Check out all the coverage on the
So many
website.
questions we're not touching.
I know, yeah. I mean, there's some questions in there we've talked about. I feel like we've about hit everything. Steve Brown said, "How did the backups look?" It's tough to tell. Harold looked okay. Um, we'll get more into that. I promise, folks, all your questions will be answered at least by us. The football team has to answer their own on September 2nd, but we will be here talking about practice. Next availability, I believe, is next week. There'll be some player interviews for a couple of days coming up, so stay tuned for all that. Stay tuned for Jason's work on the website. It's here, man. Football season is here. It is hard to believe that it is already time for college football. Jason, as always, appreciate it, my man.
Always fun.